Okay. Here we are, Charlie and Linda Bloom, back with you for a Bloom Talk. And
Hello.
today we're speaking about if you're thinking about getting marriage counseling.
Or relationship counseling.
Yes, or relationship counseling if you're not married.
No.
And what we have observed over our many years in the field is a lot of people think about it. And they think about it, and they think about it, and they think about it. But they don't make that call to set up the appointment time. And the researcher that we really respect a great deal is John Gottman. And he has researched how long a average couple, waits while they're struggling in confusion, sometimes not addressing the real issues that need to be addressed. And we were both startled when we first heard this, that the average amount of time is more than 6 years, that they've just been tabling, getting to the roots of the issue. And I think that's just a crying shame that people are not as happy and content and peaceful and enjoying their relationship as much as they could if they got some help. Because there's so much good help available. There's so many wonderful workshops for couples. There's so many wonderful YouTubes and DVDs, and even going to your clergy or a family member to get some help from them, but certainly to avail yourself of the wonderful couples counselors that are around. So one of the things that we've examined is what's holding people back from reaching out to ask for help. And one of the things that we find is a cultural dictate that it's very important to be independent, that to be dependent is somehow lesser than, it's weak. There's something bad about that, like it's a dirty word. And so the culture elevates independence and denigrates dependence, which is a shame, because that paralyzes people from telling the truth and say, I'm confused. I really don't know how to handle this issue that we have that we keep fighting about or that we can't discuss. And when you get past the cultural influence, that is really helpful to reach out to somebody to ask for help. Hopefully a skilled, experienced couples counselor.
Mm-hmm. So, we're hoping to be able to address some of what we consider to be the most prominent questions that we get about this subject. And we're probably not going to get to all of them. We're certainly not going to get to all of them in any significant detail, but we want to at least touch upon some of the questions that we have found often come up for people in regard to the question of whether or not to get help, to get counseling help with a relationship. So of course that's the first question is, well, how do you know if it's time to do that? We certainly don't want to encourage people just to jump in and pick up the phone and get somebody to rescue you from your situation before you've really given it your best shot. We want people to really make an effort. It's not like, well, we don't ever fight, and we just had this fight, and I'm really freaked out about it, and so we need to get a counselor. What we want to encourage you to do is not to wait until things have broken down to look at how can we strengthen and improve and enhance and deepen our connection. The best way to avoid having to get counseling is to really do the work of co-creating a really mutually fulfilling relationship, which isn't going to ensure that you're not going to have breakdowns. In fact, if you're in a relationship, you're pretty much guaranteed of having breakdowns. It's not a matter
of us,
if, it's a matter of when.
The best partnerships have them.
Yeah. And breakdowns, contrary to what a lot of people believe, are not the cause of breakups in relationships. They are something that is pretty much inevitable, and it's not whether or not we have them, but it's how we respond to them and what kind of skills we've developed and to what degree to deal with differences that show up, again, even in the best relationships. So, so how do you know when it's time? How do you know who to go to? How do you know whether or not that person that you've gone to is the right one? How do you make that call? How do you make that distinction? What happens if one person wants to go and the other one doesn't? What happens if one person likes that counselor and the other one doesn't? In the process of even talking about getting help, issues will come up. Differences will come up. One of you might be more inclined to want to get help earlier than the other one. The other one might feel like, no, we need to work at this more. So how do you deal with some of those differences? So that's some of the things that we want to talk about. And by the way, if we don't cover or get to the question that you may have or questions about this topic, then you can always feel free to email us, and we're happy to respond and give you some input offline.
I want to make a point that I feel really helps head off trouble at the pass. If you have an agreement with your partner that if either one of you feel that you've done everything you can about the particular challenge that you're facing, money, sex, decision-making, the power in decision-making, disciplining the children, the in-law issue, whatever the issue is, if you feel like you've done your best and you're at an impasse, if you're gridlocked on an issue, if it's still uncomfortable and you've given it your best, that either one of you can say, it's time for us to get help from somebody. Sometimes waiting for both of you to be on the same page, because people have different levels of pain tolerance. One person may be able to compartmentalize the issue, and it's not keeping them up at night. They're not, it's not keeping them from feeling closer to you, but the other person may be, really twisting in the wind and it's bothering them a lot. So the first person to notice, we're at an impasse here, we need help. If you have that agreement in place, you will get help sooner rather than later. And everybody's heard, because it's been in the media for decades now, that for a cancer diagnosis, early diagnosis gives you the best possible chance of a full recovery. That's the same guideline when couples are in trouble. Early diagnosis of the issue and the treatment of the issue can get you on a healthy path. And I want to tell you one more thing that I think will be really helpful in making the decision about getting the couples counseling. Sometimes people are afraid that they're going to go and that the counselor is going to be like a judge and they're going to take sides. And it's not just the men that are worried about this, although I hear it a lot from the men, that they were reluctant to go because most of the couples counselors are women and that the women are going to gang up on me and make me bad and wrong. And it is not the job of the counselor to take sides. It is not the counselor's job to be the judge. And sometimes people go in and they present their case and then they want the counselor, who they're trying to project the idea that they're the judge, on them and to side with them against the other person, that they're all wrong. And if you're seeing a good counselor, they were going to help you see how you may be getting in your own way, how you might not be communicating clearly, how you might not be getting vulnerable enough, how you might not be setting your goal or expressing how much a particular thing means to you so that you appeal to your partner to come and join you with that. So this issue about fear that the counselor is going to make things worse or going to humiliate you really needs to be looked at. And don't continue seeing anybody who you feel isn't really on both of your sides. And there's one more thing that I want to make a point about. people are afraid to make that first counseling appointment because they think they're going to get roped in to coming for a few to several months, maybe even more than that every week. And it's going to be so expensive and such a time demand. And if you have a good counselor, they are going to be working with you about independent study that you can do between the sessions. And it doesn't have to really run you a huge bill. If you're with somebody who's skilled, who doesn't want to get you dependent on them to keep coming back, they're always working to put themselves out of a job. So they're going to be working with you to have you doing practices at home on your own, to turn that ship around and to do, really making some gains. And they're going to be offering you opportunities to choose among about what you really want to take on. For instance, developing the qualities that you need to be eligible for a higher level of well-being in your partnership.
So that raises the question of, how do you choose somebody? There's a lot of people out there. What's the grounds on which you make that decision? How do you even find out who is out there? Used to be in the old days, people would look in the yellow pages. Actually, what we have found is that there's a very high percentage of people who get referrals from friends of theirs who have had positive experiences. And what you may find out, if you haven't already found out by talking to some of your friends about this issue, is that quite likely a lot more of them than you think have had challenges in relationships and have had cause to call in a third party. So one of the ways to just to begin to get some ideas about who's out there and who might people have had positive experiences with is just by talking about that. And of course, what that will require of you is to be willing to be vulnerable with people and let them know, George and I are, having this go-rounds and we keep repeating the same arguments and it's really getting frustrating. That is one way to kind of open up the conversation. Mm-hmm. And of course, you don't really have to even say that, but that is one way that makes the other person feel more inclined, if they do have any experience in this, to say something about what, their experience has been. So you can, check with people who you feel a sense of trust with, trust that they will, respect the nature of your concerns and trust in their judgment, mm-hmm. and trust in their willingness to respond to you with some degree of empathy and understanding.
And how about after you get a few names of possible therapists to see? How would you recommend that people vet them to get the best possible
I always
fit?
believe in going in alphabetical order.
No!
But if you don't do that, then, I think just the whole question of going, that you're asking about, raises the very important question of how much is it appropriate to ask of when you're speaking to a potential therapist, how appropriate is it for you to ask questions of them that are important to you to know? Questions like, what's your success rate in dealing with couples? Have you dealt with couples who have this issue? What is your background in doing this work? Even questions that might seem overly personal, like what is your experience in committed partnerships? Have you ever been married? If the issues involve children, do you have kids? Some people are even though they would like to know that, and that is really important information to have. Not that somebody who doesn't share your exact same experience can't help you. That's not the case at all. But in the way that they answer those questions, you'll get more of a sense of them. The main thing is we're looking for somebody, not necessarily that's going to make you happy, that you feel good with, that says nice things, that you're comfortable with. You're looking for somebody that you feel that you can work with, somebody who has a way of being that feels like, yeah, I think this person could help us. Because sometimes doing this particular kind of work, being a relationship therapist, requires a whole wide range of ways of being. It's very different than getting a personal individual therapist where it's just one-on-one. Here, you're dealing with somebody who's going to be having to deal with your dynamics in the session. So they're going to have to be more able to be proactive. They're going to have to be able to intervene sometimes. They're going to have to be able to take a stand and ask one person if they can say more about something and ask the other person if they can hold back their opinion for a second. They're going to have to be more able to access a wider range of ways of being rather than just being supportive and sympathetic and empathic, as many individual therapists, rightly so, are. But they're going to have to be willing sometimes to be proactive and to do and say things that may not always feel good to both people.
But may be really good for you.
Yeah.
So if you're seeing a couples counselor that allows you to go on and on and on with the blame game, you're not in good hands. Some therapists aren't strong enough to intervene and to put some limits on that and to have you get out of the cycle that you're probably doing at home if you're having trouble getting past.
I just want to interrupt for a second, Linda. I don't know that it's necessarily a matter of strength that they're lacking. Doing relationship therapy really is a whole different animal.
It's a whole different skill set.
It's a very different skill set.
So it requires more than just being supportive and letting people emote.
You may be working with somebody in your individual therapy that you're finding very helpful and very supportive. Mm-hmm. And at some point, it might seem like bringing your partner in could be a good thing to do. And sometimes it is. But not all individual therapists are geared towards the dynamic that they're going to be encountering. If they're not experienced doing much relationship therapy, what they may be inclined to do is just to kind of continue the way of being.
Individual therapies with each of the couple.
Yeah, and that is limited in terms of what you can expect as far as the dynamics in the
So your clarification, point taken.
Goes, yeah.
But the point remains that if you're involved in couples counseling where you're continuing to express anger and more anger and more anger and more anger, then getting down to the issues about the hurt and the fears are not really being addressed. And that's when the real connection takes place, where people start to hear and understand each other, not necessarily agree. And that's when the couples therapy will really move ahead. So what we find is some of these unskilled couples counselors allow the arguing to go on way too long.
Well, it may be a lack of skill, it may be a lack of strength, it could be other things. But if the cycles, I mean, most couples who come into counseling have experienced and are experiencing repetitive cycles that they keep replaying over and over again. If in the counseling session, those cycles are getting played out, but they're not getting interrupted, then there's a problem there. And it's something that you might want to bring up with the therapist.
Right.
And if your efforts to get some more effective help in that area don't bring about results, then you might want to reconsider continuing to work with this person. Because one of the things that you have a right to expect when you're paying money and it's good money, we
Progress
understand
every session.
you should be noticing changes in the relationship. Now, they may not be very overt, they may not be very dramatic, they may be subtle, but you should be noticing that you're leaving the sessions and having an experience between sessions in which there's some awareness of some changes in the ways in which you guys are relating to each other that are an expression of what you've been learning in the counseling sessions.
And the felt sense will be one of more optimism and hopefulness and less despair and less settling, less a grin and bear it, less settling for less than what you really are
less resignation.
Longing for. That's exactly right.
Resignation.
Now, here's another thing to consider. Some people really have a negative association with going for couples counseling, but going to a couples workshop, a relationship-oriented enrichment workshop, feels better to them. And so if you're the person who wants to go to couples counseling and you've asked your partner a number of times and you're hitting the wall with that and they just don't want to join you in going for couples counseling, consider finding the best couples workshops around, even if you have to travel a ways to get to it, because that can make all the difference. And we hear all the time, and we've been hearing this for years, that people feel that in a 3-day weekend workshop, Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday, they feel like they got more out of that than the couples counseling that they've been doing for 3 or 4 or 5 months. And so it's like buying in bulk. Do you know that you get to have a concentrated experience and you get the benefit of the reassurance of the other students in the class that these are garden variety issues. It's not some deep-seated horrible psychopathology that's going to take years to heal, that it normalizes the challenges that we face because they're not an infinite amount of things that we have to deal with. And also you have the cross-fertilization of hearing of some of the other couples who may have something brilliant and profound to offer that will fit just for you. It may be important than something that the relationship facilitators say to you. So I can't say enough about the belief that I have in the couples workshops, and we know who the people are who are facilitating the really good ones. Use this as a resource because we have a whole panel of people who we endorse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's I think that last element that Linda mentioned about getting to hear from other couples who are struggling too is very important, because there's a lot of embarrassment and even shame for many people about feeling like there's some kind of a failure if they need to get help, as though there are people out there who have great relationships, and then there are the losers out there who don't. Mm-hmm. And because there still are some negative judgments about people who need to get help, we don't talk about it very, very freely and very openly. And so there's some embarrassment about it. And as a result, it's very easy to develop the idea that everybody else out there seems to really have their act together, and
they might just have a good image.
They seem like they're really put together and they're happy. And can't tell you how many times we have heard from people that even some of their close friends that they thought really had this thing wired right, they found out that they're getting divorced. Mm-hmm. I mean, how did that happen? And as it turns out, we can't always tell what's going on inside another person's relationship, inside their home, inside their own heart. We don't know. We don't. Mm-hmm. we all work pretty hard to put together and to construct a pretty solid image of I'm happy, we're happy, we're successful, no problems, everything is fine. And so when we are having some struggles, and then we have this belief that everybody out there is doing great except for us, it makes it harder to really be honest with ourselves and with each other. And so we really want to encourage you to consider doing things like going to, for instance, a couples retreat or a workshop, and just getting some perspective and seeing that we're not alone. The thing that people tell us more than anything else about our workshops, and it's not just ours, but it's workshops in general about this issue, is that they realize that they weren't the only ones. And that's an incredibly liberating feeling. Wow, what a relief, We're not uniquely screwed up. We're kind of ordinarily screwed up like most other people in some ways. And the sooner, we can acknowledge that, and the sooner we can be proactive in terms of let's work together to see what we can do to handle this issue, the less time and the less money it's going to require to fix it. Sometimes one session can be enough to turn the corner.
And here is an important thing that I think might help the listening audience. Sometimes the most difficult part is just to get started. Do you know that first step is so hard to get out of the holding pattern and to step into proactive? And sometimes the first step, a small step, a doable step, is just to choose one person in your life, a close friend, maybe it's a family member, to tell the truth to, that you've got an issue in the relationship that's bringing you some discomfort. We just heard the statistic last week that 2/3 of couples, when they have the first child, the well-being in the partnership goes down. I thought it was more than that. A third are doing fine, but 2/3 after the birth of the first child. And it goes down more after birth of more kids, because the kids, require a lot of time and attention that takes away from the romantic partnership. And people struggle through that without asking. Do you know somebody in the graduating class ahead of them that's more experienced about how to feel that it can make all the difference in the world if you have some childcare, if you leave the baby with somebody, so that you take a date now and again with your partner to keep the romance alive. And some people are working so hard in the 2-career families that their relationship is withering on the vine. And to talk to somebody who's been through that, who reprioritized the relationship and lifted it up to a place of prominence, can make all the difference. So sometimes just coming out of hiding and admitting to one person can get the ball rolling. Because if you can admit it to somebody in your family or your friendship network, and they say, well, this is a common issue, and there are a lot of couples counselors who could help you get past this, that could be a real opening for an up level for your partnership. Just getting the ball rolling. So we need to wrap up because we're at the end of our time.
Coming to that time again.
Yeah. It's good to be with you. Please tell your friends, follow us on Facebook. If they haven't gotten the free ebooks, they're pretty wonderful, if I do say so myself, and we'll give you a little glimpse of next week.
So what is next week going to be?
Yeah. One of the most important things that you can do for your relationship.
One of the most important things you can do for your relationship. Well, we don't have enough time to tell you that, so you'll have to tune in next week. Have a great week.